Once upon a time, there lived a couple, Musia and Marian, who were married for over 10 years and had no child. They did everything possible to conceive, but all in vain. This couple loved each other very much, but with time, their childlessness began to strain their marriage. Musia was very supportive of his wife and never gave her any reason to worry. But Marian could not stand the idea that she had been married for over 10 years without a child. She always looked at herself in the mirror and took the blame for their childlessness. But her husband never stopped reassuring her that one day they would have a child of their own if they kept their faith high. He even suggested that they could adopt a child from an orphanage, though it would be a complicated move. He explained to her that waiting a little longer for a baby solution, as they hoped and prayed, would eventually answer their prayers in due course. Marian was not so convinced within her heart that adopting a child was their best option. She always wanted her own, and listened to her husband's decision to wait more patiently as they prayed. She raised so much joy whenever she was around children and ensured that she attended any ceremonies that had to do with children, always laying her hands on these children and asking God to bless her with her own child. By doing so, she thought she was breaking any curse that had haunted her life and made her childless for all those years. However, one bright morning, Marian decided to attend the naming ceremony of her friend's baby. During the ceremony, she walked up to her friend to congratulate her on the birth of her baby. As she stretched her hands happily to hold her friend's baby, she was denied the opportunity to hold the baby. Marian acted unbothered by her friend's attitude and politely stepped away. When she was leaving the ceremony, she overheard her friend discussing with another woman, saying that she could never allow Marian to touch her baby with her barren hands. Her friend further said that Marian had killed all the babies in her womb with her witchcraft, and that she would never allow her to kill her own child. This was too much for Marian to hear. Unable to control her emotions, she burst into tears as she returned home extremely sad. Her husband Musia saw that his wife was very hurt and decided to comfort her in his arms. She narrated to him what had happened at her friend's child's naming ceremony, and he realized how deeply his wife was hurt. They decided to adopt a baby from the village orphanage. The next morning, Marian could not contain her joy. She was like a baby who had just been given candy. She walked happily with her husband as they headed to the village orphanage. Once they arrived at the orphanage, they caught sight of a quiet girl who sat alone in a corner. Marian immediately took an interest in her and decided to adopt her. The matron of the orphanage told them that the girl's name was Julie, and that she had been found abandoned in the forest when she was still a baby. The matron tried to discourage them from adopting Julie, but nothing she did worked as Marian's mind was already made up to adopt Julie as her own daughter. Musia and Marian finalized her adoption and took her home. Marian had never been that happy in her entire life. She could not stop staring at her husband, who had made her dream come true. All the sadness she had felt for all those years disappeared, and she loved Julie so much. It seemed like a dream come true. Julie adapted quickly to her new home. Musia and Marian showered their daughter with love and attention, and for the first time in years, the house was filled with laughter and joy. However, it wasn't long before Marian began to notice strange things happening around her house. Doors were opening and closing by themselves, which terrified Marian, who had never experienced anything like it before. One morning, Marian woke up and realized that all the plants in her garden had mysteriously died, and she wondered how this was possible. She began to notice that her daughter Julie would sometimes sit in a corner, staring blankly and whispering in a language no one could understand. This also caused her husband to start fights and quarrels for no just cause. One day they fought for hours, and when they finally regained their composure, they realized that they had damaged most of their house's belongings. They both looked around and saw Julie on a chair, staring angrily at them. Marian got terrified because she knew that Julie was the one behind all that had been happening. That evening, while she was preparing supper in the kitchen, her pot of soup mysteriously fell to the ground, barely missing her legs. When she turned around, she saw Julie looking at her angrily before walking back into her room. This shocked Marian. A few minutes later, she heard a weird noise coming from Julie's room, and decided to check what it was. When she opened the door, she found Julie speaking to an invisible force. Marian asked Julie who she was talking to, but Julie screamed at her in anger, causing items in the room to fall to the ground. Marian ran out of the room, terrified and shaking in fear, as she waited for her husband to return to narrate all that had happened to her. When Musia came back home, she narrated to him what had happened, and they both sat in the corner, wondering what to do. "Should we send her back to the orphanage?" Musia whispered to his wife, who shook her head in disagreement, saying that Julie was just an innocent child possessed by evil spirits, but needed to be loved and find a way to overcome what possessed her. Late that night, while they were asleep, they heard a strange sound in their house. Musia decided to check what it was, and to his surprise, saw Julie walking out of the house alone. Curious as to where she was going at that time of night, he decided to trail her secretly. He followed her through the village, keeping a safe distance to avoid being seen, and watched her advance into the depths of the village forest to a part known to be avoided by the villagers. Julie led him to a huge tree in the forest, where she stood and began to chant in a strange language. Her voice sounded possessed by an evil spirit, as dark figures emerged from the tree and began to circle around her. Musia hid in the nearby bushes, terrified by what he was witnessing, and now realized why the matron did not want them to adopt her. Musia decided to retreat quickly, fearing what would happen if Julie saw him. When Julie screamed at the top of her voice, Musia decided to return and see what had happened. He found Julie unconscious on the ground. He quickly rushed to her and carried her home, worried that something terrible might have happened to her. Musia and Marian waited patiently for her to wake up. After a few hours, she stood up from her bed and smiled at them. Her smile sent shivers down their spines, but they tried hard to pretend that nothing had happened. Despite the terror that Julie brought into their home, they never stopped loving her and continued caring for her. They spoke to her gently, reassuring her of their love. Julie, in her quiet moments, began to feel the warmth of their love and kindness, something she had never experienced before, even at the orphanage. This started to touch the good part of her heart, and she began to fight the darkness within her. This was not an easy battle for her. One evening, while Marian sat behind their house braiding her hair, Julie burst into tears. These were not tears of an evil spirit, but the genuine tears of a little girl who had been abandoned after being possessed for so long. Marian held her close, whispering words of love and comfort. She told Julie that no matter what happened, she would be there for her like a mother. That night, when everyone went to sleep, Julie had a dream. She was standing at the edge of a dark forest, and an evil spirit was trying to pull her back into the shadows. On the other side, her adoptive parents were calling her name. When she heard the voices of Musia and Marian calling her, she gathered all her strength and ran towards them. When she woke up, something had changed. The darkness within her had weakened, and Julie was now filled with extraordinary strength. The evil spirit inside her was still there, but it no longer controlled her. As the days went by, Julie continued to fight the evil that resided within her. The strange happenings around the house became less frequent. Julie laughed and played like the child she once was. One day, while Julie was playing, she fell to the ground and began to shake. It was a moment when the evil spirit made a final attempt to reclaim her body. Marian held her tightly, speaking words of love and encouragement in her ear. Something miraculous happened. A dark shadow emerged from Julie's body and disappeared. The evil spirit was expelled, banished forever by the power of their love. At that moment, Julie sat on the ground, breathing heavily. She looked up at her mother and smiled, happy to be free. In the months that followed, the bond between Julie and her parents grew stronger, and their home was now filled with joy and laughter. One evening, while Marian was preparing dinner, she felt a fluttering in her stomach. This was unusual, and she began to feel different. The next morning, she decided to visit the village healer to discuss how she was feeling. The healer told her that she was pregnant. Marian could not believe her ears. What she had longed for all these years was finally a reality. She broke the news to her husband Musia, who jumped up in excitement. unable to believe that his wife was finally pregnant. Julie could not contain her joy, eagerly awaiting the arrival of her siblings. Months passed, and Marian finally gave birth to healthy twin boys. This made their home filled with the love and happiness that they had dreamed of. Julie, a girl who they accepted into their home wholeheartedly, despite the evil that plagued her life, brought unimaginable blessings into their home. The lessons to be learned from these stories is that there is always light after darkness, and to spread love wherever you go, as you never know the impact of your little act of kindness, and to always treat others the way you would love to be treated.